Sorry, but this seat isn't yours. You should head back to economy. Those words cut through first class like a cold blade. Marcus Washington stood frozen, watching a middle-aged white man plop down into the seat he had booked 3 months ago. In Marcus's hand was a first-class ticket, seat 1A, with a confirmation code and his name clearly printed. But no one looked at it. No one checked the system. Within 5 minutes, Marcus, the CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, was told to leave his seat and moved to a middle seat in row 34, squeezed between 2 strangers, all because he was the only black man in a Tom Ford suit. No apology, no verification, no rights, but what the crew didn't know was they'd just messed with the wrong guy. Drop a comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Marcus Washington wasn't the kind of man to be shaken by rejection. At 42, he was the CEO and founder of Next Gen Technologies, a pioneering AI empire transforming healthcare worldwide. Every step he took was carefully planned, and every decision bore the mark of someone who had survived and risen from Chicago's South Side, a place where opportunity never just knocks. That morning, he woke up in a luxury penthouse in Atlanta, holding an espresso, eyes fixed on the strategic presentation running on his iPad. Today was the most important day of the year, a face-to-face meeting with the investment group from Japan, who had shown special interest in NextGen's medical AI technology. If the meeting went well, they would invest over $300 million to roll out this solution to thousands of hospitals worldwide. The car is waiting downstairs. Mr. Washington, the voice control system announced. Marcus put on his custom Tom Ford suit, slid the tablet into his high-end leather briefcase, and left the apartment with steady confidence. The flight to San Francisco would take 6 hours, just enough time to review the competitive strategy, get familiar with the investor profiles, and fine-tune the presentation. He had specifically chosen seat 1A in first class on Coastal Airlines for maximum quiet and focus. His personal assistant, Shanice, had triple-checked every detail: seat assignment, priority boarding, and even special VIP services. As soon as Marcus arrived at Atlanta International Airport, he noticed glances from people near the VIP check-in area. Not recognition, but suspicion. "Business trip?" the TSA agent asked with a probing look, while hundreds of white businessmen walked by without being questioned. Marcus just smiled and answered briefly. Yes, he was used to suspicion, thorough checks, and being sized up. In the first-class lounge, he again caught a strange look from the receptionist. "I need to check your ID again," she said after scanning his ticket. The white man in front of him was waved through with just a ticket. No questions asked. Marcus said nothing. He entered, found a quiet corner, opened his laptop, and began reviewing cardiovascular AI, diagnostic performance charts. Fully focused, until the announcement came, "We invite first-class passengers to board." He stood calmly and walked toward the gate, holding up the QR code on his phone for the attendant to scan. He heard the familiar beep confirming it. "Enjoy your flight," the attendant said, already looking toward the next passenger. But at the boarding door, flight attendant Brittany Miller's smile quickly faded when she saw Marcus. "Let me see your boarding pass," she said coldly. Something she hadn't asked the white couple just before him. Marcus showed his phone without a word. "First class is on the left," she said, her tone guarded and uneasy. Marcus stepped inside, found seat 1A, opened the overhead bin, carefully placed his briefcase, and pulled out his iPad. He was jotting down notes about competitors when a shadow fell across his screen. "Sorry, but you're in the wrong seat." Marcus looked up. In front of him was a middle-aged white man, wearing a cheap suit, his face flushed with anger. "This seat is mine. 1A, the man insisted. Marcus calmly pulled out his phone, showing the screen with seat 1A clearly labeled Marcus Washington. "I also have 1A, the other man said, holding up his ticket. "Suspicious coincidence," Marcus said. "Maybe the system made a mistake. We should call the flight attendant to check." And that's when Brittany turned back once again, her eyes fixed on the white man. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, as if Marcus wasn't even there. "This man is sitting in my seat," the man said firmly. Marcus held up his ticket. "We both have seat 1A. I was confirmed at check-in." "Please check the system before making a decision." Brittany glanced at Marcus's phone screen, then looked back at the other man. "I'll handle this right away, sir." And in that moment, Marcus understood. They weren't checking the facts. They just believed. That woman, Brittany Miller, the one who just smiled at the white passenger earlier, now stood in the first-class aisle, her gaze icy as it fixed on Marcus. She didn't ask any questions, didn't check the system, just simply said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to another seat. This passenger is assigned to seat 1A. Marcus stayed seated, his voice calm but firm. "I understand there's been a mistake, but my ticket was booked and confirmed 3 months ago. It was checked at the boarding gate. I suggest you double-check the system." Brittany didn't budge. "I've seen enough. This passenger is in the right seat. If you don't move, I'll have to call my supervisor." Marcus glanced around. A few eyes from other passengers were starting to drift toward them, a well-dressed black man being asked to leave his seat with no valid reason given. He took a deep breath. "I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm just asking for a transparent process." But instead of verifying, Brittany turned away, spoke quickly into her radio, then went back to the man named Richard Whitfield, who claimed he was the rightful occupant of seat 1A. "Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Whitfield," she softened her tone. "We'll take care of this right away, so you can sit where you're supposed to." Marcus heard every word clearly. That voice was completely different, gentle, compliant, almost apologetic. But with him just cold orders. A few minutes later, another woman appeared. Her name tag read, Katherine Johnson, the head flight attendant. She approached, calm and experienced in handling conflicts, but her eyes only focused on Richard. "What's going on here?" she asked Richard, as if Marcus wasn't even there. "I'm being sat in the wrong seat by this man," Richard said, his irritation showing. Marcus stood up and raised his phone. "Here's my ticket, 1A. I ask you to check the system again." Katherine glanced over, then quickly turned back to Richard. "Sir, let me confirm right away." Then she looked back at Marcus with a dismissive nod. "It looks like there's a small glitch in the system, but Mr. Whitfield was assigned this seat earlier." "I'm afraid you'll need to move. I bought this seat, confirmed it over 3 emails, and it was checked by the gate staff," Marcus replied. His voice remained calm, but every word carried a chill. No one checked the system. No one verified the facts. They just took his word for it. "Sir," Katherine interrupted, "I ask you to cooperate, or you risk being charged with disrupting the flight." Disrupting. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He'd heard that phrase thousands of times before, a language weapon used to silence black people. That phrase needs no proof, no reason. It just has to be said by someone in uniform with authority. Firm footsteps echoed from the cockpit. A tall man in a pilot's uniform stepped out, shoulders straight, eyes sharp. Captain William Hayes. "What's the problem here?" he asked. But like the others, he looked at Richard first. "He refuses to leave his seat," Katherine quickly explained, "although it seems the system double-booked those 2 seats." Hayes didn't ask any more questions. He looked at Marcus and said, in a voice cold as steel, "Sir, I'm going to ask you to move. If you continue to resist, I'll have to ask security to escort you off the plane. Marcus was silent for 3 seconds. No one verified anything. No one asked when the tickets were booked. No one checked the manifest. People just saw skin color, then made their decision. Fine, he said. No shouting, no reaction, just a nod full of frustration. I'll move. And with that, the black CEO of a billion-dollar company was pushed down to seat 34E, squeezed between two strangers, in a cramped, lowly seat, under the whispering eyes of the economy cabin. No one apologized. No one gave up their seat. No one could imagine that the man being humiliated was the one holding the fate of the entire airline in his hands. The middle seat in row 34 was cramped and suffocatingly tight. Marcus tried to squeeze his shoulders close to the person next to him, curling his legs to avoid touching the passenger in front. His Tom Ford suit was nearly ruined, the collar starting to wrinkle. But what hurt the most wasn't his body, it was his pride. He said nothing, no complaints, but inside his head, everything was spinning. Could it be that just because of his skin color, the whole system was ready to overlook clear evidence to back up a baseless claim? The person to his left was a young student, wearing headphones, leaning against the window, eyes glued to her phone screen. On the right was a large man, breathing heavily, his body spilling over into Marcus's seat. But not everyone looked away. One person quietly watched everything. Jessica Taylor, the passenger, sitting across the aisle. She was a white woman in her early 30s, with brown hair tied back, dressed simply, but with a touch of elegance. The moment she saw Marcus being moved to economy class, she took off her headphones, not just out of curiosity, but because her discomfort had passed the point of staying silent. She had witnessed it from the start, from Marcus being asked to leave his seat, to the cold look from the flight attendant, and how the whole system didn't even bother to check before making the decision. Jessica opened the voice recorder app on her phone. She had seen too many times how the truth got twisted, simply because there was no proof. This time, she wouldn't let it happen quietly. As the cabin settled and the plane taxied down the runway, she pretended to adjust her neck pillow, placing her phone in the best spot to record. Then, just then, she heard the first words. Behind her, in the galley where the flight attendants gathered, a woman's voice said, "Is that the guy they moved down there? Clearly not first-class material." Another woman responded with a mocking laugh. "Yeah, probably used points or got a free upgrade." The first voice added, "Just look at his face when they kicked him out." "That's the funny part. Who does he think he is?" Jessica blinked. Not angry, just quietly horrified. Those words, full of contempt and prejudice, were spoken openly, right in the middle of the flight, by people serving the passengers. And Marcus was sitting just ahead, completely unaware. Jessica adjusted her phone, making sure the recording was running smoothly. She didn't know what she would do with the recording, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay silent. As the beverage cart began rolling through economy, Marcus shifted slightly and tried to call another flight attendant, one who wasn't involved in the earlier incident. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to retrieve my leather briefcase that's still in first class. It has documents I need for a meeting." The young flight attendant sighed as if he was a bother. "I'll see if someone can bring it back. We're just getting ready to serve drinks." Marcus nodded gently. No blame, no reaction. But he knew well, for anyone else, just one word would get them taken care of. Jessica kept watching, her eyes now lighting up with a stronger feeling determination. She quietly pulled out a napkin and scribbled a few lines on it. "I see everything they're doing to you. I recorded it. I'm an office worker at the company. This isn't right." She stood up, pretending to go to the bathroom, and as she passed Marcus's seat, she gently dropped the napkin on his lap. Marcus looked down, then looked up, their eyes meeting. No words were needed, just a look. But in that look, Marcus realized one thing: he wasn't alone. He carefully folded the napkin and slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. The feeling of isolation began to crack. For the first time since boarding the plane, he felt there was a chance, a possibility for change. He didn't know who Jessica was yet, but he knew one thing clearly: he had just gained the most important thing before taking action: a witness, someone willing to stand for the truth. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the lights dimmed and the sound of the service cart wheels rolled softly down the aisle. Marcus sat quietly in row 34, his body pressed tightly between two strangers. But his mind had shifted into a different state, a state of waiting. Not waiting to arrive, but waiting for the truth to come out. The napkin Jessica gave him was still tucked in his inner jacket pocket. He hadn't opened it again, but the message written on it was firmly etched in his memory. Someone at the airline office, a recording, a glimmer of hope. At that moment, voices started up behind him again. A group of passengers whispered, not quiet enough to go unnoticed, but not loud enough to cause confrontation. "Did you see what happened at the start?" a woman asked her husband, her voice low but clear. "Yes, I saw it clearly. He had a ticket. I saw him hand it to the check-in staff, and yet they still kicked him out," the man replied. Another voice chimed in from the seat across the aisle. "I was near the gate. The receptionist even wished him, 'Have a nice flight.'" How could there be a mix-up with his seat? None of these comments were directed at anyone in particular. No one reacted harshly, but the words began to stir something quiet, spreading. Up front, a first-class passenger, a gray-suited Asian man, watched Marcus being escorted off. He was still seated in 3A, but now his gaze was fixed on the flight crew. When he saw Brittany serving wine to Richard Whitfield in 1A, he shook his head slightly. Mid-cabin, a black graduate student on his first long-haul flight pulled out his phone and went online. He typed, "A black man just got kicked out of first class right in front of me. He had a ticket. Confirmation. No one checked. I don't know who he is, but what they did was wrong." The tweet was posted at 10:48 a.m. 7 minutes later, it had 300 likes. An hour later, it surpassed 50,000. At that point, Jessica Taylor returned to her seat, silent. But the look she gave Marcus clearly said, "Wait." Not long after, the food cart began making its way to row 34. Marcus shifted slightly, trying to catch the new flight attendant's attention. "Do you have any water?" he asked. The attendant handed him a glass with her left hand, avoiding eye contact. No smile. "No thank you." Then, from a few rows back, a woman's voice rang out, noticeably louder. "Can you at least look at the passenger when you respond?" he asked politely. Everything around fell silent for a moment. The flight attendant turned, surprised. The passenger who spoke was a middle-aged Latina woman, carrying herself with authority. "He deserves to be served just like anyone else," she continued. "Don't lose respect because of what happened earlier." Marcus turned around and caught her gaze. He didn't know her, but this time, it didn't matter. What mattered was being right. A white man sitting nearby nodded quietly. "I've been watching him from the start. That wasn't fair at all. They didn't check anything." A young Asian man with glasses pulled out his phone. "I recorded the part when the flight attendant asked him to leave his seat. If anyone needs proof, I'm happy to share." A wave was rising, not loud or wild, but steady. A wave of ordinary people, observers. Those who had stayed silent were starting to stand with the truth. Marcus didn't smile, but his eyes began to warm. He wasn't alone, no longer trapped between two rows of seats, no longer the only one holding a quiet anger. Just then, Jessica's phone vibrated softly. She looked at the screen, then whispered to Marcus, "Something's happened." "The office knows." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who knows the executive vice president? Some passengers have already filed complaints directly through the app. Marcus leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The wave had reached the shore. From here on, things were no longer in the crew's hands. The intercom sounded for the second time. "We are preparing to serve lunch. Please lower your tray tables and remain seated." But no one was paying attention to the food. Many minds were now drawn to a different story, the story of the man in seat 34E, who had been downgraded without anyone bothering to check. Marcus sat still, but inside, every sense was on high alert. He knew the game was changing, not because anyone on the crew suddenly felt remorse, but because they were starting to realize they were being watched. Shortly after Jessica whispered about the executive office, Marcus noticed something unusual stirring in the cabin. Catherine Johnson, the lead flight attendant, was whispering with another attendant, then headed toward the cockpit. 3 minutes later, Captain William Hayes came out. This time, it wasn't to threaten. His face was serious, holding an internal control tablet, but his eyes didn't look at Marcus. Still that piercing stare, as if Marcus was just an inconvenient passenger. He walked over to Catherine, and they exchanged a quiet conversation. Though they spoke softly, Catherine's eyes flicked quickly toward Marcus. "What's going on?" A passenger up front whispered, "Probably about that earlier incident." Another replied. The atmosphere in the cabin felt like it was being squeezed tight. Many people started whispering, glancing at their phones, some opening Twitter and Facebook. A hashtag began to appear, wrong. Seat right man. At row 34, Marcus turned on his video recording, silent and private, just a quiet record in his front jacket pocket. Not for revenge, but as a precaution. At the same time, a flight attendant approached. Not Brittany, but a new male attendant, looking awkward. "Mr. Washington?" He lowered his voice. "The lead flight attendant wants to see you in the back area." Some quietly recorded the cabin. Others were sending messages, and on social media, the hashtag #WrongSeatRightMan had hit the top 10 trends. When the announcement said the plane was beginning its descent, the entire cabin was filled with a strange feeling. It was no longer just a normal flight. This was a flight of truth, and the truth was no longer in the hands of the first speaker, but in the hands of those brave enough to capture it. When the intercom announced the plane is descending, "Please fasten your seatbelts," something strange began happening in the cabin. There was no longer the usual murmur of chatter. The familiar sound of flight attendants chatting was gone. Only tense silence remained, waiting to explode. Passengers weren't just watching anymore. They started to act. A white man, sitting in seat 7D, in business class, raised his hand to call a flight attendant. When a young man approached, he lowered his voice just enough for those nearby to hear. "I just witnessed passenger Marcus Washington being asked to leave his seat without any verification. I want to know what the airline's procedure is in situations like this." The flight attendant hesitated. I'm not authorized to answer that." The man nodded calmly but firmly. "Then please escalate my request to the highest authority on this plane. I'm a senior lawyer, and I believe this shows clear signs of racial discrimination." That statement wasn't just aimed at the flight attendant. It rang out like an alarm bell, waking up the whole cabin. In economy class, a young Indian student set his phone down on the tray table and faced forward. The screen showed a live stream titled "Live: Discrimination on Coastal Flight 1857. At the same time, a Latina woman in row 38 started pulling up the passenger list from the booking app, cross-checking it with the security footage. They pushed him off here without even checking his ticket number. "I'm going to send all this evidence to the Passenger Rights Alliance." A young white man in row 30 raised his phone, turned on the camera facing Marcus, and said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, if any of us have ever felt disrespected because of our skin color, gender, or age, stand up by sharing what's happening here. This is a passenger being forced off a seat they legally bought. We can't stay silent." Passengers clapped, starting with a few, then spreading throughout the cabin. No shouting, no cursing. Just steady applause, echoing like the heartbeat of a community waking up. Brittany Miller walked by, about to say something, but when she saw the phone's raised recording, she fell silent. Her face went pale, and she turned back toward the front of the cabin. In business class, Jessica Taylor was texting nonstop. She sent videos, timestamps, confirming every passenger who spoke up. No longer alone. Now, she had a group of witnesses ready to step forward. Marcus looked around. In his eyes was something no one could take away: faith. Faith in change, starting from one small act: standing up, speaking out, no longer silent. An elderly Asian man, probably in his 70s, sitting in front, spoke loudly. "I lived through discrimination back in the South during the 60s. What I'm seeing today is no different. Thank you, young man, for having the courage to film this. And thank you to that man," he pointed at Marcus, "for not leaving the plane immediately. Your presence here is the strongest silent resistance." Marcus nodded. No words needed. Everything was clear. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes was receiving continuous updates from headquarters. Prepare to receive VIP guests at the airport. Do not take any further action on your own. Avoid direct contact with passenger Marcus Washington. Hayes sighed. We've gone too far. Katherine Johnson, standing nearby, was still trying to reach the ground crew chief to ease tensions upon landing, but all signals from headquarters carried one message: don't touch him anymore. Prepare for consequences. As the plane's wheels touched down on San Francisco runway, a tense silence spread. No one stood up hastily. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a new chapter to begin, and they wouldn't have to wait long. The intercom crackled again, this time with a different message. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats once the aircraft has come to a complete stop due to special procedures. The crew will guide you on how to disembark. A female passenger whispered, "Something big must be happening." Another replied, "Big things have already happened. Now the airline has to face it." Marcus looked out the window. The midday sun blazed down on the runway, shining bright. He knew the first act had closed, and now it was time for the real stage to open. The airplane door swung open, not for passengers to disembark as usual, but to welcome two people in dark suits, wearing high-security name tags from Coastal Airlines. No one clearly stated who they were, but their demeanor and gaze indicated they weren't there to serve drinks or arrange luggage. "What's going on?" a passenger whispered. "They must be here to take him out," another guessed, glancing towards Marcus. But what happened next left everyone speechless. The two security personnel did not walk towards row 34E. They headed straight to first class. To seat 1A, the seat that belonged to Marcus. "Mr. Whitfield," one of them said, his voice low but commanding. "Please gather your belongings and come with us. This will be explained clearly once you leave the plane." Richard Whitfield turned red, bewildered. "What?" "I am the vice president of Monroe Financial. I have a ticket. This is a mistake. We have verified. Your ticket is for seat 1B, not 1A. Please cooperate." Richard stood up, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am?" One of the two replied, remaining expressionless. "We know, and we also know who you took the seat from." The entire cabin stirred. Passengers began to whisper louder. Many had pulled out their phones to record. And that was when a woman's voice rang out from the business class, clear and firm. "I would like to address all passengers." All eyes turned to Jessica Taylor, who stepped from row 3C into the aisle. "I am Jessica Taylor, Vice President of Customer Experience at Coastal Airlines. I witnessed the entire incident from the beginning. I confirm that passenger Marcus Washington was treated in a discriminatory manner, against protocol, and untruthfully." The atmosphere erupted in surprise. A passenger in economy class shouted, "Who is he?" Jessica looked towards row 34. Marcus stood up and walked forward. The light from the window illuminated his face, calm, composed, yet commanding. "My name is Marcus Washington," he spoke. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Next Gen Technologies, a company specializing in artificial intelligence that serves thousands of hospitals across 3 continents. I am also a major shareholder in 3 airlines, including Coastal." A wave of silence spread through the cabin. No one breathed loudly. No one dared to look away. "And today," Marcus continued, looking directly at Captain Hayes, Katherine Johnson, and Brittany Miller, who were frozen in place, "I was removed from my legally booked seat, without verification, simply because I didn't look like what you think a first-class passenger should look like." The passengers applauded, not quietly, but with determination. Each clap was a confirmation. "We witnessed this." Jessica nodded. "I recorded the racist remarks of the flight attendants. Those words not only insulted Mr. Marcus, but they insulted all of us." A woman stood up. "Do you have the recording?" Jessica pulled out her phone. "It has been saved and forwarded to the legal department." "And I have also sent it to him." Marcus nodded. He held up his phone, connecting it to his personal Bluetooth speaker. The recording played. "Just look at the face when he was removed from his seat. It's really funny. They always think they have the right." The noise in the cabin surged. A man whispered, "I can't believe this." An elderly woman said loudly, "Now I understand why he chose not to remain silent." Captain Hayes stepped forward, his tone no longer firm. "Mr. Washington, I..." "Don't," Marcus interrupted. "When I asked to recheck the ticket, you threatened to have me removed from the plane." "Now the truth is clear," one of the security personnel from the front of the plane said loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the crew will not be instructing you to disembark as usual. We have taken over the situation, and the entire crew will be replaced for the next flight. We ask that you remain calm." Katherine and Brittany were stunned. "Replaced you can't." "Orders from the Executive Vice President," the other one interrupted. "Immediately." Marcus turned to Jessica. "Now they know who I am." "But I don't need them to know my title. I need them to understand that a person doesn't need to wear the right skin color to deserve respect." Jessica replied softly, "And today you made sure they couldn't ignore it." As the passengers were still buzzing from the recording played over the loudspeaker, and the crew had yet to fully respond to the shocking reversal, a new figure appeared at the front of the cabin. A woman in a dark gray suit, hair in a high bun, a shiny name tag. Alicia Morales, Executive Vice President of Coastal Airlines. She did not rush. Each step she took was calm and sharp. She walked straight to the front row, stopping in front of the crew who looked as confused as students caught cheating. "Captain Hayes," she began. "Without any greeting or beating around the bush, the entire flight crew will be temporarily suspended pending an internal investigation." Hayes frowned. "I understand, but we need to know the official reason." Morales raised her hand, not allowing any excuses. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Katherine Johnson, Ms. Brittany Miller. We've received numerous recordings and feedback from passengers. Some information even came directly from the airline's internal staff, including Ms. Jessica Taylor here." Jessica nodded and stepped up next to Marcus. This is no longer a personal matter, Morales continued, turning to Marcus, but a matter of the airline's reputation and operational integrity. At this moment, the entire cabin was eerily silent. No one moved. Even the passengers in the farthest rows leaned forward, as if not wanting to miss a second of this unfolding drama. Morales turned to face the passengers. Her voice was clear, no microphone needed. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Coastal Airlines, I sincerely apologize to you, especially to Mr. Marcus Washington, for the embarrassing experience he has endured on this flight. Not a single clap was heard. Only the silence of waiting and judgment, Morales continued. We confirm that the booking system had no technical errors. Seat 1A was booked and confirmed in Mr. Marcus Washington's name. His being moved to economy class was due to a subjective, unverified decision that shows signs of discrimination from the flight crew. Marcus did not react, but his gaze was cold and deep as ice. Morales's words did not ease his mind. That was the bare minimum. Right after the plane lands, Morales continued, all three mentioned will be suspended from duty. An independent investigation conducted by the board of directors and a third-party auditing firm will take place within the next 72 hours. The results will be publicly announced. A young passenger behind softly spoke up. And what about Mr. Whitfield, the seat thief? Morales looked toward seat 1A, where Richard Whitfield sat motionless, his face as pale as ash. As for passenger, Richard Whitfield, she said, he will be asked to leave the flight and will be recorded as violating the customer behavior policy. The information regarding this incident will be forwarded to the legal authorities and relevant financial partners. A woman in economy class softly clapped. Then another person joined in. The clapping spread like a ripple. This time, it wasn't out of anger, but because for the first time throughout the flight, justice began to take shape. Jessica stood silently next to Marcus. She looked at his face serious, but not bitter. She knew, for him, this was not a moment for satisfaction. This was a time for action. Morales turned back to Marcus. Mr. Washington, she said, her voice softer. I know that just saying sorry is not enough. But I promise, the company will fully cooperate if you want to take this further, both legally and in terms of reform. Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, but everyone could clearly hear the steely undertone. Take it further. I don't want to take it further. I want to get straight to the point. Morales looked surprised. Straight to the point, Marcus said. I don't need a voucher. I don't need an apology read from a PowerPoint slide. I need the truth. I need every passenger on this flight to witness that power is not a privilege reserved for white people. And respect is not an option reserved for those who fit a certain appearance. A louder round of applause erupted once again. Morales nodded. Then let's start with this flight. And start with you. As Marcus returned to seat 34E, a backup flight attendant appeared to escort him to first class. But this time, Marcus raised his hand to refuse. I'll stay right here, he said, because this is exactly where they think I belong, and I want them to remember that feeling forever. As Morales exited the plane to prepare for the official process with the legal team at the airport, the atmosphere in the cabin felt like it was waiting for a verdict. Each member of the flight crew, Katherine Johnson, Brittany Miller, and Captain William Hayes, stood silently, no one daring to move from their position, not because of the duty, but because they knew everything had gone beyond their control. And this time, there was no script to help them handle it internally and move on. Morales returned in under 5 minutes, this time accompanied by an HR manager and a legal representative of the airline. They stood right at the middle of first class, holding 3 large, numbered, and sealed envelopes. "We have prepared the necessary paperwork," Morales said, not looking at the flight crew, but staring directly at the passengers. All passengers on Flight Coastal 1857 are direct witnesses to the incident that just occurred. Therefore, we will handle this transparently, without delay. Whispers started to rise. Some passengers raised their phones to record. Others, especially those who had witnessed Marcus being demoted, sat up straight, their eyes glued to the historic moment unfolding before them. Morales stepped up to Katherine Johnson first. "Ms. Katherine Johnson, as the head flight attendant on this flight, you ignored the rights of the passengers. You made a decision without proper verification. You also enabled discriminatory behavior to occur. According to Clause 14.6 of Coastal Airlines Service Procedures, we are suspending you immediately." Katherine did not respond. Her face shifted from a deep red to pale white. As the disciplinary envelope was handed to her, she simply nodded slightly, like someone who had just been drained of all their energy. Next was Brittany Miller. "Miss Miller, your behavior was not only unprofessional, but also clearly discriminatory. This behavior was recorded by internal staff and independent passengers. You will be suspended indefinitely and placed under review for termination within the next 7 days." Brittany opened her mouth as if to say something, but when she saw a passenger live streaming the announcement, she froze and lowered her head. Finally, it was Captain Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," Morales said, "as the head of the flight, you should have been the one to remain calm and verify the facts before making a decision. But instead, you threatened to remove a legitimate passenger from the flight, misusing your authority. We are forced to suspend all of your operational rights until the Flight Coordination Board conducts a review." Hayes did not argue. As an experienced person, he knew when he had lost. But no one was quieter than Marcus Washington at that moment. He remained seated in 34E, his eyes fixed on first class, where he had once been pushed out, and now he was witnessing each of them being escorted out of the cabin. As the three turned to leave, escorted by the legal representative, the entire cabin erupted in applause, not out of joy, but because justice this time was not being avoided. A middle-aged passenger in row 32 spoke up. "Today, I saw an airline act properly right in front of the passengers for the first time." An elderly woman in row 29 chimed in. If it weren't for that recording, if no one had filmed it, they would have covered it all up. Morales turned to Marcus. "We will hold a press conference right at the airport. If you want to speak, we're ready." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need a microphone. I have enough witnesses already." His words made the entire cabin go quiet for a moment. Sometimes, the least said carries the most weight. Jessica walked over to him and quietly said, "You know, the passengers are talking. They're calling you the bringer of justice in the sky." Marcus smiled. "I don't care about the title. I just want one thing next time. When a person of color steps into first class, no one should question them with their eyes anymore." As the plane began to leave the parking space to prepare for the next journey, a new group of flight attendants had completely replaced the old crew. One of them approached Marcus, leaned in and said softly, "Sir, thank you for not staying silent." Marcus nodded. It's not out of pride, but because he knows he is just one link in a chain of change that is being activated, and from now on, no one can reverse that. The VIP lounge at San Francisco International Airport has never been this crowded. Camera flashes are going off continuously. News outlets like CNN, MSNBC, Bloomberg, and even local stations are present, waiting for one of the most talked-about press conferences in the aviation industry this year. A large sign, hastily but formally set up behind the podium, reads, "Coastal Airlines, Commitment to Transparency, Restoring Justice, and Comprehensive Reform." Below it are three people: Alicia Morales, Executive Vice President of the airline, Jessica Taylor, Vice President of Customer Experience, and the one sitting quietly with hands clasped on the table, Marcus Washington. No one doubts his central role in the recent upheaval anymore. Morales steps up to the podium first. Her voice is clear. She doesn't read from a paper, and she doesn't shy away. Ladies and gentlemen, today, Coastal Airlines is not holding this press conference to protect our reputation. We are here to face the truth. She pauses, looking directly at the row of reporters. Flight 1857 from Atlanta to San Francisco experienced a series of unacceptable behaviors, discrimination, abuse of power, and lack of transparency. We not only acknowledge the mistakes, but we will also take action to correct them at the root. A scattered round of applause comes from the internal staff standing at the back of the room. Morales nods, then turns to Jessica. Jessica steps up, wearing a simple but neat black blazer. She looks towards Marcus, then at the crowd. I was one of the witnesses from the beginning. I was also one of the first to record. Not because I knew exactly what was going to happen, but because I knew that without evidence, the truth would be buried again. Her voice is steady. Her gaze is direct. I'm not doing this because I'm an employee of the airline. I'm doing this because I am a human being. At that moment, Marcus stands up. He doesn't step to the podium, just stands up in place. But his presence makes the entire auditorium silent, as if people are about to witness something extraordinary. I don't have a speech, he begins. I just have a few things to say. Cameras turn toward him. Microphones from the stations are raised. On that day, I wasn't downgraded in my seat. I was downgraded as a person. I'm not the first, and if the system doesn't change, I won't be the last. He pauses for a beat. Then he continues slowly. I'm not asking for privileges. I'm only asking for fairness. And today, I want to honor those who did not stay silent in the face of injustice. He points at Jessica. She bows her head. She didn't turn away. She didn't just record. She stood up, while many others chose to stay on the sidelines. Marcus looked down at the front row, where a few passengers from the flight had been invited to attend. An older Asian man, a young Indian student, and a middle-aged Latin woman were all present. All those who stood up said, "We saw it, we heard it, and we don't agree."